TV18, The Thought League, Season 2.
Hello and welcome to the Thought League, a show where the global luminaries share their actionable ideas for change. And today we are going to discuss a very important topic at this juncture when climate change, medicine breakthroughs, as well as technical disruptions are taking place. The need for making India the hub for science, R&D, as well as innovation. And to discuss this, we have an eminent panel. Let me welcome on the show Dr. VijayRaghavan, who is the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India, and Cyril Shroff, the Managing Partner of Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas. Gentlemen, so good to have you on CNBC TV18. Dr. Raghavan, my first question to you, where according to you India stands when it comes to innovation as well as scientific R&D, and what is the thrust towards that at this point?
India is actually very well poised in a very complex and challenging world. And the reason for that is that we have invested over decades in the foundations of science, technology, and its translation to industry and the economy. The challenge we have today is that many of these pieces of high quality need to come together in cooperation if we are to go forward and indeed have our rightful place. That's beginning to happen now, and that interdisciplinarity is what we need to further enhance.
That's right, Dr. Raghavan. And let me pose a question to Cyril Shroff as well. What do you think needs to be done, and in terms of how imperative is it for India to take a lead in this particular respect, Cyril Shroff?
Thanks, Nisha. And this is a very timely episode. So if we've learned anything in the last 2 years, it is that science is more important than almost any other discipline, including finance, management, or even the law. And as we set on our target of a 5 trillion and thereafter a $10 trillion economy, we are going to have to use innovation as the engine of progress. Now, I believe that innovation will not happen unless we have fundamental research and deep research, and not just copycat or imitation research. See, India has the brains and the manpower, but there are a lot of issues in relation to policy, funding, and sometimes even the legal framework. So I think we have, just to build on what Vijay said, I think there is a great imperative of now taking this forward in a very systematic way. And there are many ironies. So, some of our best brains sometimes don't do as well in India as they do outside. This is one problem. So there is obviously something missing in our environment or setup. The second, I think, is that we are a contradiction really of scientific excellence amongst the best in the world, and also superstition. And kind of nothing embodies it more when, for example, recently I was reminded of a picture where the new Rafale aircraft, uske niche limbu aur mirchi lagaya tha. So we coexist in two Indias. And I think the interesting thing is that we are now poised for exponential growth if we get our policy right, which is why we need people like Dr. VijayRaghavan to show us the way.
That's right. Very interesting points there made by Cyril Shroff. And it's not just about funding or about models of approach or the government thrust and the regulations. It is also about the cultural aspect and the environment for development of scientific brains in the country, Dr. Raghavan. I hope you agree with that. But where we fall short, clearly, is the number of patents that India has managed to file vis-a-vis many developing as well as developed worlds. Also, the number of scientists per million people in the country. So, obviously, there is a need for more. What are the suggestions when it comes to a breakthrough in this?
I think both Cyril and you, Nisha, have addressed some very important issues. And they relate to both fundamental research and technology going into society. Now, technology goes into society in two different ways. One is when you expand the footprint of fundamental research capability in the country, then there's a great impact on the economy. Right now, 90% of our research support goes into our central institutions and universities where only 10% of our students go. And 90% of our students go to places where only 10% of research support comes in. And therefore, we need to open up our research institutions of quality and have them interact much more with our universities, both central and state. That's beginning to happen. So that will expand hugely the research footprint and have a churn in ideas and capabilities which are rearing to go into the market. The other side is industry. Industry still does not invest hugely in research, and as opportunities for that increase in partnership with our institutions, then we're going to see more patents, tech transfers, and so on. This is happening in one sector, the startup sector, which is more anchored today on software, but you're starting to see very interesting developments in the hardware area also, for example, in 4G and 5G, and we can talk about that a little later.
So, Dr. Raghavan spelt out a lot of the ideas and the areas of development. But Dr. Raghavan, one more question to you. Is there a winning model which has worked in any other country which is closer when it comes to the socio-economic structure of India, which can be incorporated and lessons learned for India to really take that lead in this respect?
Absolutely. We have to learn two important things from the United States. At the start of the Second World War, the United States ranked in its defense capabilities something like 15th or 20th in the world. By the end of the war, it was amongst the top. And that was the pressure of war. But soon after that, this US realized that it cannot depend on economic growth on surges of investment in R&D, but it needs to broad-base R&D investment. And it started the National Science Foundation, and that National Science Foundation made its then middle and lower rung universities top class in research in addition to the elite places. And that broadening today has had extraordinary impact for more than 70 years from now. So that's something we can learn how in a democratic society, broadening access, democratizing science can have extraordinary value. And that's something we have done in some ways, and therefore we have got a lot of high quality units. Now we need to break the barriers between the units and bring them together.
That's right. That's a great example, Dr. Raghavan. But Cyril, Shroff, we know for anything to develop further, there has to be money pumped into it. Do you think that private sector can play a very important role in this?
Oh, absolutely. But I think the real answer, and if I can build on what Dr. Raghavan said, is that we really need a public-private partnership. Take the example of the internet. It was invented or discovered in the US defense services, and then look what the private sector did with it. Similarly, in India also, we have our UPI and the India Stack and other stuff, and we're just at the early stages of the extensive innovation that is going to follow on top of the basic public goods that are being, or public research that is being created. So there are certain things which the private sector cannot invest on in scale, but once the basic infrastructure is provided, whether it is digital or various types of research, fundamental research and data, which the state is better positioned to do. After that, the private sector can take it forward. And I think the private sector is looking for those opportunities to make those fundamental and generation-changing innovations and investments.
That's right. But what about regulations? Do you think the regulations are helpful enough for this space to grow further?
So I think I'll just move a little bit from regulations and raise it to more public policy, really. And regulations is just one part of it. So there are 3 or 4 things which I think need to be done, and Vijay can speak about it in more detail. Firstly, I think we need to systematically and institutionally encourage innovation. So if we can have Make in India, why can't we have Innovate in India? And if we have that, I think that will result in a number of steps like more labs and incubators, R&D grants. Foreign companies should be incentivized to come and set up their R&D in India. On the legal side, since you asked me a legal question, I think we need to protect IP a bit better. I think one of the biggest disadvantages or fears of innovators is whether the intellectual property will be properly protected in India. But the potential is endless if we create that right environment. And we have the biggest advantage in the world that most countries do not have. We have the manpower at scale, and we have manpower which is brilliant, and the same guys go and do well in the US.
That's right. And in fact, Cyril, Shroff, you raised a very important point of the legal aspects on intellectual property. And there have been several cases in which India has seen that what is core to India is sometimes patented by the Western world because they have taken the lead and probably know the nuances of this particular bit far better. Dr. Raghavan, how do we address some of these aspects, and also in terms of regulations and government policies, what can be done to give it that push?
So let me give you some advances which have recently been made, particularly at the policy level. First of all, if you look at the space sector, the Indian Space Research Organization has been reformed in an extraordinary manner. There's a creation of a new structure called InSpace, which interacts with industry on one side and the Space Research Organization on the other to look at proposals for satellites and launches. And InSpace is headed not by someone from the Space Research Organization, but from outside. There's also the National Space Industry Organization, NSIL, which will commercialize products into the ecosystem. So this is a dramatic change. Combine this now with the changes in the remote sensing policy, the geospatial policy, and the drone policy. This opens up and simplifies a huge sector, which is commercially valuable, opens up for fundamental research, and can have large impact on our tech industry as well as our software industry. So this is an example of how policy changes have had major impact already over the last few months in opening up these three sectors: space, drones, and geospatial policy. Now, the other point which is being made is about intellectual property and how that can be of value. And there are two important components to intellectual property. One is science-driven, what is scientifically intellectual property and how it should be protected. And there's often very little dispute about that. There's another aspect of intellectual property which goes into the realm of trade disputes of various kinds, and organizations, countries, groups keep quarreling over that in a manner which they put in all their best efforts to get the maximum to themselves. That's sort of distinct from the science, but nevertheless commercially very important. And in today's world, what is happening? Because design is very, very important, both in semiconductor design, circuit design, design of instruments, and so on. Indians are doing very well, and Indian startups which go into design-based technology have great room for developing intellectual property. That's happening a bit now and needs to scale up a lot.
That's right, Dr. Raghavan. Very well pointed out. ISRO has covered many milestones in the recent past. On the medicine front, India has been there and has managed to really combat the situation when it comes to COVID. And the third, SaaS companies have also made it in global arena. So some of those very important landmark milestones being covered by India in terms of R&D as well as innovation. We'll take a short break and we'll discuss more about this particular bit and how India can become a hub for R&D as well as innovation. And on the other hand, what are the ethics that needs to be followed in this particular journey? Stay tuned to the Thought League. Welcome back. You're watching the Thought League and we are discussing a very important topic. Is it time for India to become a hub for R&D as well as innovation and science technology? Now, Dr. Raghavan, we have discussed a whole plethora of ideas which can really give a thrust. But which are the areas where we need to focus a lot more? Because in the present times, a lot of global structures have changed and there are new normals. There is something called climate change, which is also causing a lot of innovation, as well as telephony and digital space is also growing very fast. So which are those areas where India needs to focus now?
There are some very important, what I would call verticals where India is strong. Biotech and pharma is one such area, and there are a few others. Now, in biotech and pharma, we have excelled in being major exporters of what are called generics or biologics. Basically, these are products which have been innovated abroad, which we have been really good at driving the process in new ways, in simple ways, and exporting. This is not to be sniffed at, by the way, as some people say, oh, this is not innovation. You need to be extraordinarily innovative to do this. But this has provided the foundation today, combined with opening up of our research system into being innovative in this area in a manner which serves our large population. Agriculture is another area. Education is another area where it's sort of a feedback cycle which is self-serving. The more efficient you are at educating, the better you can be. So these are the verticals. The horizontal, which cuts across all of these, are tools such as cyber-physical systems, artificial intelligence, and various other kinds of digital tools. These are, again, areas where Indians are doing better and better in multiple aspects here and abroad. And when those are applied to these verticals, I think there's a great chance that by pulling all of this together, we can do really very well, both in terms of social, economic development, and being globally competitive.
That's right. And in fact, we have had many breakthroughs which have been also showing up in the applicability to show quick results on the commercial front as well and business applications. So Cyril, Shroff, we've used AI, algos are being used by so many companies for different applications, as well as even in bioscience. Many breakthroughs have been made, including also the telecom space where we are heading towards 5G. How do you see the overall economics panning out and the business case of the use of technology in the present scenario in Indian business community?
Great question, Nisha. And I think most of the research that has been done, as well as the innovation, a lot of it is having commercial applications as well. I'd just like to add a few more topics, especially, you mentioned climate change, which I think links very closely with the sustainability and ESG agenda, which has become so mainstream. So I think there's a lot of innovation that is happening as well as needs to happen in power generation. For example, in the renewable space. Now, 2/3 to 75% of the solar panels in the world are made by China. Why should that be the case? Why can't India, and it's such a big risk from a country point of view as well. So using both the vertical and horizontal framework, which Dr. Raghavan pointed out, I think there is a lot of potential and possibility. I think we are at the threshold of a major revolution in artificial intelligence. And I think that those are some of the themes that we need to build upon to create a truly powerful engine of both research and innovation, because they are, two sides of the same coin. You're not going to be able to have innovation without research or vice versa.
Dr. Raghavan, while we are so exuberant about science and technology and the way it can change the world, what are the ethics that needs to be followed? And especially when we look at the gene editing in particular, how are we going to contain the disruption, make it of better use, and therefore also not give that superpower in the hands of the humans?
As technology swarms all over the place, both, for example, in AI and in biology, ethics plays a central role, because these technologies have the tendency to amplify and sometimes amplify in a manner where people who control it know what is good for you, as opposed to you knowing and you participating and deciding what is good for you. AI is one such example, and ethical AI is the cornerstone of the Indian artificial intelligence mission. Now, in biology, today the tools of gene editing are quite extraordinary. Very recently, for example, you had multiple genes edited in a pig so that it could be, quote unquote, immunologically humanized in a manner so that its heart could be transplanted into a human without rejection and efficiently. Now, this is really extraordinary, and one can imagine sometime in the future how these kinds of xenotransplants would be relatively standard. And they, of course, raise all sorts of issues when they scale, particularly about ethics and proprietary cost, accessibility, equity, and so on. In our context, principally, they have two different kinds of meanings. One, access of the benefits of technology to a large number of people. And that means costs need to come down so that access can be large. And secondly, access in a manner where your rights and your decision making are not compromised and you're not used in a manner which is done without your understanding. Now, that requires a huge amount of education, training, and communication. So one aspect, the technologies need to be accessible widely, and the other aspect, everyone needs to know about what it means.
That's right. While science is just so useful, Cyril Shroff, you will agree that globally we have seen many crisis situations, and the global communities developed and various fora with various countries have played a very crucial role. Have they reached the maturity to handle new disruptions as well, in your view?
I think this is a continuous dialogue, and given the threshold at which we are, whether it is on AI or on biology, I think there needs to be a broader public discourse on this. So the WHO and the EU and other forums have already started. They put out white papers as well. I think it's time that India does that as well, because I think there is a strong overlay of ethics on all of this, and which is linked to public policy and the legal framework. And it is time that we have an open dialogue on this, because that's currently not happening in a stronger way as I would expect. We have to create a fine balance fine ethical balance between the spirit of innovation and taking away the fear of failure. And that can only happen when you have a possible, boundary condition and parameters around which such experiments can be tried and used for human good. Because the same thing, this gives you the power to play God, and it can create havoc in the wrong hands.
That's right. A very important point to end the very riveting discussion on. So the House is united. Disruption, extremely important right now. And India needs to take a lead in this. And there has to be a mindset change and a better public-private partnership going forward in the area of science and technology, and therefore innovations by the country. Thank you so much, Dr. Raghavan, Cyril Shroff, for joining us on the Thought League. And with that, it's a wrap. Thanks to our viewers for tuning in.
Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas presents CNBC TV18